Project managers, have you ever felt like you should get that promotion or a better job? Start a business. Write that book. Have you ever felt you were made for more but didn't know where to start?
Welcome to the PM for the Masses podcast with your host, Caesar Abaid.
Learn from the experts. Think outside the box. Have a voice, network, and be extraordinary.
PM for the Masses podcast.
Well, hello everybody and welcome. I'm Caesar Abaid, your host, and this show is your regular reminder that your career matters more than your job and that your life is a project and you are the manager. Whether you work for a company or for yourself, your job stability is really just your ability to land your next gig. So join me in practicing intentional, planned, and value-adding relevance starting right now. My friends, today I have a really exciting episode for you. And you know, if you've been listening for a while, that I'm a car guy, and I may have said a few times that I'm an electrical engineer by trade. So we're diving into my world here, you know, the things that I look into when I'm at my spare time. You know, I like open YouTube and I check out things like this. So we're diving into the world of electric vehicles today, but it's nothing, I mean, EVs are nothing new, but what we see here is we're talking about heavy duty trucks, okay, that are disrupting industries like logging and construction. And that's kind of new and unique. There's been a lot of talk out there with the Tesla semis and some other companies, but my guest here today, Chase Barber, is actually doing the work. Okay, he's the co-founder of Edison Motors, a Canadian company that's really shaking up the trucking world with their unique approach to electric and hybrid vehicles, and we're gonna get into all of that. So I've been following Edison Motors on YouTube for a while now, and I have to say I'm just captivated by their approach to problem solving, their business acumen, and I think more important than anything, their authenticity. Chase isn't your typical tech entrepreneur, and I'm going to bring him in just a second. He's a former log truck driver who, along with his partner, decided to just tackle the challenges of the trucking industry head on, especially in the world of electrical vehicles today. And their journey from the driver's seat, I think they're still driving, but to the forefront of EV innovation is not just inspiring. I think it's a masterclass in practical problem solving and project management. So I have more to say, so maybe we can just get into this. We're not going to be talking much about the nitty gritty of project management, I think, but whether you're a project manager listening right now, you're looking for inspiration, or an entrepreneur interested in clean tech, for example, or just someone fascinated by innovative solutions to real problems, you're in for a treat. So let's welcome Chase Barber to the podcast and learn more about him and Edison Motors. Chase, thank you so much for making the time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on here. Looking forward to talking about, I guess, our unique approach to project management.
I hope we'll talk more about more than just that, because
You bet.
I think the first video that I saw, and I was checking your YouTube, I think you're more of a TikTok person, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the first video that I saw of you on YouTube, it was when you were talking about, I think it's one of your most popular shorts. You're talking about placing an order for the Tesla semi when it came out, and then tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so a bit of our background is that, well, me and my business partner, Eric, we owned a trucking company and we hauled logs. So I kind of saw the advantages of these electric trucks, because logging in the west coast of Canada, we're up in the mountains. So you're going uphill empty to get the logs, and then you're coming downhill loaded. So you can take advantage of that regen braking, recharging the battery, and basically use the stored potential energy of the logs at the top of the mountain to recharge the batteries going back down. And then, so it was during the event, they had a little button that you could push during the event to reserve your Tesla Semi now. And me and Eric were like, wow, let's try it. Let's go for it. And we reserved it. And then after about 5 years of waiting, we're like, oh, fuck, they're never building this thing for us. Let's just ask for our money back, and we can build our own electric truck. How hard could it be? I mean, very, very hard, but we figured it out.
Right. And I don't know if you've ever talked about this in your videos, but I think calling your company Edison is fantastic. Is there a story behind that? and it is what I think it is?
Yeah. So obviously, we ordered the Tesla Semi from Edison Motors. So we're like, well, you know what? If we're going to ask for our money back from Tesla and we're going to build our own truck, then obviously we need to call our company Edison Motors because we're stealing Tesla's idea to build an electric semi truck.
That is so awesome. I love that story. That's so cool. All right. So thanks for explaining that part, the logging. I'm here in Canada. We don't really have a whole lot of mountains where I live, but my wife is from the West Coast in the States, and we see those trucks all the time. So it's really interesting, that concept, because like you said, the truck goes up the mountain empty, right? So then, maybe it doesn't take that much of a battery, I guess, to take the truck up there. And then you load it, and then all that potential energy that's up in the trees, up in the mountain, right? Like as you bring it down, it can convert it into electrical energy back into the batteries. And that's just brilliant. But you also, the trucks are hybrid, right? So explain that powertrain for us. Like when does the diesel engine kicks in? How does that work together?
Yeah. So we started doing the math on that whole uphill empty, and like that's best case scenario for an electric truck. And the math still wasn't enough to get an electric truck through the day using like a 1 megawatt hour battery, and which was going to be really heavy. And like we're looking at it, like it still won't do a full day's work, even in a best case scenario. So we looked at it and we're like, well, why don't we just add a smaller diesel generator? Because by this point in the time, a little bit of background, I guess, we were doing hybrid power system. So we went from, the company grew over that 5-6 years since ordering the Tesla Semi, and we went from just hauling logs to low bedding. Then we started hauling generators around with the low bed. And then we realized that you could make more money if you were the one handling the whole project and installing the generators. So that led up to us taking on these generator power system projects. And then what we found out is that Eric started looking at one community, for example. They were running off 100% diesel, and they wanted to replace a 90 kilowatt hour generator with a 90 kilowatt hour generator. He said, well, that seems really high for a community of 20 people. Let's look at your power consumption. And what they found was that the average power was only 20 kilowatts, but the peak power, like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon when everyone would get home, would spike up to 70 for about an hour or two. So that's why they would have a 90 to meet that 70 and have a little bit of extra capacity. And we're like, well, that's insane. Your average load is only 20 kilowatts, but you're putting in a 90 kilowatt just to meet a peak demand. You're up in northern Canada where it's like 24-hour daylight in the summer. Let's put in some solar, and let's put in like a 35 kilowatt hour generator, because then that 35 is going to meet the base load, and then we'll put in the battery bank, and that battery will handle the peak load demand. So the batteries handle the 70 kilowatt, 90 kilowatt hour spike. The solar in the summertime recharges the batteries, and then the diesel just provides that nice base load. So we could downsize from 90 to a 35 kilowatt hour generator, which huge fuel savings. And this was after we ordered the Tesla Semi. So we started looking at it and we're like, oh, the Semi isn't enough. And it was during that one project where we kind of looked at it, and we looked at our Kenworth that we hauled all the stuff up there with, and you're like, well, a semi-truck is the exact same as this hybrid power system. It has a huge peak power demand. When you're starting off from a red light, when you're climbing a hill, it takes a lot of energy to get that mass up to speed. But once you got the momentum, you're just cruising, it may only take 200 horsepower. You need 600 horsepower to get it up to speed, but you may only need 200, 300 horsepower to keep that mass moving down the highway once you hit 100. So why don't we do the same thing we did for those off-highway, off-grid systems, and we'll put in a battery bank, but it doesn't have to be a 1 megawatt. It can be a much smaller battery bank. We'll move from a 15-liter diesel down to a 9-liter diesel to meet that peak load, and then we can still have the electric motors on the axles. So we still have the regen and braking, recapturing energy when you're coming downhill. You still have the regen braking, slowing the vehicle down for red lights, and it made the system a lot more efficient. So that's what we kind of decided on doing, and that's what we set out to build.
That's so cool. Wow, and there's there's a difference too, because when you're going downhill, it's a net positive, right? You're actually you're actually absorbing energy as opposed to just using it, which is not the case for the village, for example, right?
No, I mean that is a huge advantage. They couldn't do that.
Right. Yeah, it's such a smart thing, and then you still have the advantage of the torque of the electric motors, right?
Huge. We're pushing out, like on the tri-drive now, we're pushing out 1,400 horsepower.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we don't need 600. We got 1,400. Like, you want to move from a red light or you want to climb a hill, it's time to move.
That's right. That's right. Whether you're loaded or empty or full, it's the same torque too. Like
it would be insane. Like, you would never be able to do that with like just a pure diesel, because the torque on the drivetrain, the torque to the transmission, the size of the motor you would need would be like 15,000 pound motor, like a hood that's like 15 feet long. Like it wouldn't work. Like, you couldn't physically do it. So we settled for 600, and everyone just settles for the fact that semi trucks are really slow at red lights, really slow, and you're stuck behind them when they're climbing hills. Like, everyone's just like, oh, I guess that's how it is. Like, it doesn't have to be that way. These things could be running 1,400 horsepower while still getting better fuel mileage than they do now if they embrace the hybrid.
Right. And the curious part is, like, this is not a new technology. I was in the Canadian Navy for many years, right? And in the reserves, and the ships there are diesel electric, right? Like the propellers are turned always by an electric motor, DC motor of all things. And then we have the diesel generators. They're called diesel generators, DEs that we call them, on board. There's 4 of them, and all they do is they generate electricity. Locomotives also operate that way, right? But for some reason, nobody had thought about doing the same, technology for trucks, or maybe people tried, but they didn't succeed. Do you know anything about that?
No, I mean, they really haven't. There was some like parallel hybrids where you have a drive shaft, like you still have a diesel motor, a transmission, a drive shaft, 2 rear ends, and then an electric motor that assists. But you lose a lot of the advantage because you still need the diesel motor and the transmission, and it still has to be the same size, so you can't downsize it, and it's not about as much peak power demand. Plus, you still have all the weight of the diesel, plus you're adding the weight of the electric. Like, this way, we kind of balance out. Like the smaller electric or the smaller diesel motor with the hybrid offsets the weight of adding the batteries in, so like it balances out. You don't get that with parallel. So I don't know why nobody made a full diesel electric semi truck before us.
I can imagine also because you are the regulations for vehicles that do logging, for example, because they're up on the mountain, they're unpaved roads. Are they different from if you're just driving them on the highway?
No, they're the same regulations because they still, like, the vehicles still have to go on the highway.
Right. So it's not even that. It's because that's a barrier, right? For new car makers, they can
don't get me wrong. That was a nightmare to manage, getting all of our road legalness. To get a vehicle to be like that we built by hand from ourselves is like, to get road legal was a stack of paperwork that was a nightmare.
All right. So maybe we start to get into the project management. Okay. So, all right. So, okay. So, I'm guilty of this. I'll be thinking about, I have ideas for all sorts of solutions for different things, and they stay in my head most of the time. The podcast is a good example of things that I actually acted on and I did it. But
nice.
And I'm sure there's a lot of truck drivers out there full of ideas, mechanics, and full of ideas. I love to watch videos of mechanics. Like, why do engineers make more money than mechanics? And they go into the undercarriage of a truck or something. It's like, why is this pipe going over here from over here? I can't service it.
It's
right.
It is quite funny.
Yeah. So
no, I think the barrier of entry for these bigger companies is just cost. They thought it was going to cost billions of dollars to research and develop new technology.
Right, but you went and took action, right? So what? It felt like, almost feels like the universe was kind of cornering you into actually doing this, because with your experience as the driver, but also now implementing these generator and solar powered battery systems. Like, okay, it's like, how could you say no to this, right? But what? talk about that jump, from actually having the idea to actually, okay, let's make this happen. Let's get a shop. Let's get the parts. Like, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, we kind of just thought, well, let's try it and let's go for it. We're like, at the worst case scenario, it becomes a cool YouTube project.
Yeah.
Like, worst case scenario, like we got nothing to lose by trying. And I remember making the video TikTok and like, hey, if you want to support it, $50 and buy a hat. And this is what we're going to do. And we had some hats on the website. And so guys signed up and all of a sudden we sold 1,200 hats in like 3-4 days. And when me and Eric looked at each other and everyone was like, yes, this makes so much sense. Like I was explaining why we wanted to do it. Everyone said, this makes so much sense. Please do it. I'll buy a hat. I'll support you. And me and Eric just looked at each other and said, well, this is going to be more than a fun YouTube project. Like, I think we're onto something serious here. Do you want to go for it? And we basically shut down the logging business. We stopped hauling logs, stopped low bedding. We stopped doing the solar power systems, and we just went all out into doing this. Like, we just decided that, like, basically on the second day, let's go for it.
And the resources, the money basically from the investors, from the purchases, they were in, that was enough to buy groceries, for example, and take care of not only the business but your lost income.
Oh yeah, no, definitely was not enough for that. We did about $450,000, but me and Eric moved in with my parents. So we lived with my parents for rent free. We built it in their backyard in the dirt. And we just relied on a few hat sales to keep us going. They kept coming in. We'd sell a little bit of merch here and there. And like we sold a ton the first 3-4 days. And then obviously then it trickles down. But we would receive like $2,000, $3,000 a month that we could keep putting towards things, and it was pretty good. We managed to pull it off. So we built the first diesel electric prototype, proof of concept, for I think in total it was $450,000. That's what we spent in the first year.
Okay, and so did you have the truck already? Was it a retrofit? Well, what's the story? How did you do that one?
So that one, I just happened to have this old 1962 Kenworth. We were planning on just putting in a cat into it and making it another logging truck and just rebuilding it. So we already had this truck that we were going to be doing a rebuild anyways for the logging business. And we thought, well, let's just convert that one to electric then. So what we did is we had to figure out, well, how do we make it electric? How do we find the electric motors and parts? So we basically took all the parts from a wrecked Tesla and found an old like 3306 cat generator and stuck that in and kept playing around until we could find something that worked.
So you used the battery pack from a Tesla, but not the motors, right?
Oh no, we used the motor. We used the rear one from a Model S. We cracked open the motor, we welded up the spider gears, and then ran an output shaft to the truck's rear ends.
Oh, boy. Okay.
It worked. It moved the truck. It proved a hybrid, but man, we kept snapping U-joints because turns out a Tesla Model S is not meant to move 100,000 pounds of logs. Like it's just that those shafts are not rated for that kind of weight. Turns out. But we learned, and while we were building it, we were learning about how these electric vehicle systems worked, how inverters transferred the power, how the electric motors, how we controlled them, how we did the batteries, and how we run the air brake system and the charging. And we were learning all of that while we were building that first one. So while we learned, we made notes and we redesigned a second truck while we were building the first truck that was way better and works way, way better than that first one with the ripped apart Tesla. Like it was all parts that we sourced. There was no like wrecked Tesla parts. We went out, we found suppliers, manufacturers, found parts, spec'd what parts were the right size, ordered those parts in, had the parts arrive, and then started building.
Mm-hmm. And when was the proof of concept? When was that one completed? And how many have you done since then?
So that one was completed, I guess a year and a half ago now.
Okay.
that first proof of concept, and then about a year ago we built. Then it took us another 8 months to build, 10 months to build the second one, and now we're just starting to. We went through the licensing and testing, and that's been about a year. So I guess 3 years in total. Yeah, built the first one. Then the next year we built the next one, and now the last year we've been testing the one we built, and now we're just building the next ones for customers.
Amazing. And I haven't seen it recently, but you also had the was that like a side project to like do the like light duty trucks as well, like full size pickup trucks?
Yeah, everyone just kept asking, and we're like, "Hey, can that technology work in a pickup?" And we're like, "Well, yeah." Instead of 6 batteries, it would just need 2 batteries. Instead of 6 inverters, you use 2 inverters. But like we can use all the same parts. We just need some smaller motors for the electric drives for the axle. And instead of using a 9-liter, we'll use like a 3-liter. And so we started doing that. And that's going pretty good, actually. A couple of little hiccups, some wrong parts that was ordered that set it back a little bit. But they're all going together now. Batteries should be showing up here sometime in March, and we'll get the batteries in and start commissioning them and rolling the first 5 pickups off.
That's so cool. And those are full ton? Like what kind of size of truck are those?
Yeah, they're all like your 1 ton plus. So like your 35. Really, we're after like that 45 F450, F550.
Okay.
A little bit heavier duty.
Is that
not as heavy duty as a logging truck, but not 150s.
Is it because of the weight of the batteries and stuff, or
just because I think it's so stupid that all these manufacturers are building trucks. We're building electric trucks, and you're like, oh, what is it? It's an F-150 meant for somebody to go get groceries. And you're like, that's not what I use a truck for. I want a welding truck. I want a tow truck. Like, the advantage of these things are like the more you use it, the more stop and go, the more advantage you have. Like a tow truck that's running around the city all day. Well, all the stop and go driving, having electric power to work the all of its attachments, and then it just has a diesel generator. Like I don't need a hybrid to be a grocery getter. You know who does need it? The tow truck, the welding truck, the guy that's welding on the pipeline for 12 hours a day. Well, it makes no sense. He's got to buy a 6-7 liter diesel motor to move his service truck around. Then he has to put a diesel welder in the back of his service truck. And then a lot of times these service trucks have like gas air compressors or like, so now you're running 2 diesel motors just so you can weld, and you're only using that power for a little bit. Like, well, you're laying a bead down. Well, if your truck had the batteries could run the welder. The generator can just recharge the batteries, and you get a nice clean power wave while you're welding. So it's like a nice clean arc from the batteries compared to a diesel that's taking that load on and off the diesel consistently. Like that's who needs these hybrid systems, not the soccer mom that barely uses the vehicle, the person that's actually using the truck for work 12, 14 hours a day. But none of the auto manufacturers are building vehicles for that demographic. So we're like, fuck it, we'll do it.
No kidding. Yeah, you know, like as an engineer myself, this is the kind of like there was a time I was driving around towing stuff, not nearly as big a loads as you have towed, but the one thing that just bothered the crap out of me is like, here's there's an engine turning there, the shaft, right? And then I need electric power. I need to actually plug something to the cigarette lighter, the 12-volt battery, right? And then convert that to AC to use it for my drill or whatever, right? There's a generator right there. It's called the engine, you know? Why can't you just tap into that somehow to generate electricity and have that available, like you said, for the welder, for the for example, we rented a lot of these genie booms that need to be charged. They're electric, right? And here I was sitting in this truck, this diesel truck that's turning, and it's generating power there, and I can't use that to charge the thing because the current is too high. It's like, why, and like, what you're saying makes so much sense. I know.
It makes no sense that we don't use it more. Like every other industry, like oil rigs, drilling rigs, like they're all remote. So they're all running diesel. They're not hooked to the grid. And 30 years ago, they all switched to hybrid electric. But like mines all work hybrid electric, like remote mine sites all have diesel generators and then they run electric equipment. Can you imagine how confusing a mine processing plant would be if every little piece of a conveyor belt had to have a motor powering the motor, like powering the gears and turning everything? Like mechanical drive is so inefficient, yet for some reason in the automotive world, we still keep using it. And I don't know why. Like there's better ways of doing this. Like let's innovate let's take what's being done in every single other industry,
Right.
finally apply it to the working industry. But too many people just see these vehicles as of like, well, why? I run down to the grocery store. I drive to work in the morning and drop the kids off, pick up some groceries and go home. Like I barely ever drive. You're like, yeah, except for the entire industry, like all the little gravel trucks, boom trucks, service trucks, welding trucks, tow trucks that are out working. But for some reason, the automotive industry doesn't care about those guys anymore. It's awful.
Yeah. It's I think the automotive industry is just big, fat, lazy. I think at this point it's just doing things the same way for a long time, and you know how it is. This is how we do things around here. And that mentality, and then any type of disruption like that is just it's just too much of a risk, I suppose.
Too much of a risk. Why are we going to spend the hundreds of millions of dollars in engineering and design and processing just to take this new risk? And like, well, because you shouldn't be spending hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to do it, dumbasses.
Right.
Like,
and the thing too is that, as you know by now, the electrical motor and control, it's a simple thing. It's simple, right?
Super simple.
And for example, I think probably because of the batteries, but there's no reason an electric car should cost more than a gas powered car. Except for the batteries, I suppose. But and
then their cost is coming down a lot now.
Yeah.
Like when we do it, our truck costs, it's about 35% more than the diesel mechanical. But by the time you consider fuel savings, and most of the applications, your fuel savings is well above what you're spending extra to get the hybrid, and the cost of batteries is going down every single time.
Yeah, and there's economies of scale as well, because not how many electric powertrains like the one you're developing there are being sold compared to Toyota 4-cylinder gas engines out there. So just by the amount of the size of the market, right, dictates the price of things as well. But if more and more companies start doing what you're doing, then everything's going to go down in price, and it's going to get to that point. It's going to be cheaper.
Yeah, it's right.
Like
a better thing. Like Elon Musk said, what's the stupid cost of it? What's the cost of the materials? Like fundamentally, when you hit scales of manufacturing, the cost to produce anything comes down to basically the inputs into it. And you're like, there's not a lot of inputs into these electric motors. It's some bearings, some wires, there's not a lot to it. It should not be expensive when you hit economies of scale.
Right. You talk a lot about right to repair. I don't know if you would call it there, but some of the things you talk about in your videos is that, people should be able to fix their own trucks and things like that. So when you introduce electric motors and controllers and stuff, and this is something I think about a lot because I work for a company that is software, and they are big on open source, right? And in my mind, that's the software version of right to repair, is to make it open source. Do you worry about that, as you're developing the controllers and things like that, the code that it goes into what controls the engine, the motors there? Do you think about the right to repair, the electronic part of what you're doing?
Oh yeah. We put a lot of thought into that, and how people can access the codes and source the parts, and downtime is one of the most expensive things for these trucks. Like, you may have a part that's only $500 down, but you miss a day's work because of that part. Well, these trucks do about $3,000, $4,000 a day in their gross revenue. So, well, what if you can't get that part for 2-3 days? Well, now that simple $500 repair with 3 days to get the parts just turned into a $9,000 repair in lost revenue. Like, it's a major issue that people don't think, like, okay, your Ford Fiesta, needs 3 days to go into service. You borrow the wife's car, or you rent a car, or you get a loaner car from the dealership for a couple days while they work on it. No big deal. But when you're in the heavy vocational space and you've got a concrete truck or a crane truck, like imagine your crane truck goes down for 3 days. Those crane trucks are $5,000 an hour, 2 operators, plus they rely on everybody else on the job site who's working, doing the things that that crane truck is doing. And now you got to source another crane truck, and well, there's very few of those in a lot of places. It's like, well, now you're looking at that simple $500 part, maybe a $30,000, $40,000 repair if you can't get those parts nice and efficiently for them. So it's like, well, yeah, we got to make sure our customers have the most uptime. So how do you do that as a startup? Well, you got to make sure that they can have parts. So we found off-the-shelf parts. Like most of all the parts we found are parts that are easily sourceable. We made a real conscious effort that they could go into the local CBS or Fort Garry, Fleet Brake, whatever their local part store is, grab that part off the shelf, walk out to their truck, and like we actually partnered up with a couple of those parts companies, and they sat down with our parts person and said, okay, these are the ones that we most commonly have in the shelf. In stock. Like we have these ones would be like a warehouse or a day or two, but these are the parts we keep in stock. Perfect. The parts guy is able to go to our engineer and say, okay, that's the part you want to use. That's the part we always keep in stock. And then the engineer says, okay, thanks, I'll put that part into the model.
Amazing. Talk about the windshield. I love that. You had a few videos on that. The windshield for the new trucks, they are all like basically they're rounded for aerodynamics. And can you talk about that a little bit? Yeah,
so all windows on vehicles now are rounded, and they say it's for aerodynamics. Like the wind flows better around a rounded windshield, which may be true. But if you're, and it factors in, I guess, if you're running down the highway at 100 kilometers an hour, and that's all you're doing. But like for a logging truck or a low bed or a crane truck, the aerodynamics really don't matter that much. It's more important being able to source a windshield. But here's the thing is they make this curved glass. Well, now you got to license the ability to make that windshield from the manufacturer. And then all of a sudden you turned a piece of flat glass. I can get cut anywhere. Most cities have a glass shop that will cut custom flat glass, laminated flat front windshield glass. They'll take a big flat sheet. They'll cut out the shape you want. It's like $80, $100 to get a piece of flat glass made. You buy these curved special windshields, now you're looking at $800. Plus, if they don't have the windshield in stock for your model of truck, they got to order it in. So now you took a big rock chip. You guy can't see out the windshield, and your truck is down. You're spending 10 times more than you need to spend to get a fancy curved windshield. Well, how much fuel are you saving on a logging truck with that little bit of curved windshield that it's worth losing out $3,000 a day for your downtime and spending 10 times more for the glass? Like, why not just make a piece of flat glass, put it in there for a tenth of the price? And then our customers don't have to go out and find special windshields, or we don't have to carry windshields in stock. We can carry a few, but they can also have them made if we can't get them to them quick enough.
Yeah, it makes too much sense, Chase. That's the problem. It makes too much sense. And not to mention the sustainability of it all, right? You're having basic glass is just melted sand, right? You have this huge piece of sand that has to be shipped from who knows where, China, because it's proprietary, and you're sitting there waiting, and it's coming by diesel or whatever. Now, a truck that could be a hybrid, but it isn't, right? Until it gets to you, and it's like you said, 10 times the price, and then you're like praying that you're not going to get another rock chip because now you know the pain of it. That's so it just makes sense. Yeah, what
about all the small businesses too? Like,
right?
Well, you looked at it, or like I was talking with an old timer that ran the glass shop. He's like, yeah, we used to just carry tons of this, and we would do it all the time. And like with the most common trucks, we would just already pre-make windows for them, and they'd send us a big flat sheet, and we'd make the windows. Or sometimes you could buy the Kenworth windows, but if somebody needed one or a piece of equipment, like we just carry the flat glass in stock, and we just cut what we need when we need it. Like that kept the small town guys going. Now to make the curved, you need a big press and you need to mold it and you need to specially transport it, and it takes up more volume and space because it's curved, which means you can ship less, and like everything just gets more and more complicated and expensive, and it puts the small glass maker in the local shop kind of out of work. Now they just become a re person instead of actually like making and cutting glass, like the things that like they're experts in those tradesmen do. So it's kind of ruining that another thing that knocks down that small town economy.
Amazing. All right. So let's talk quickly about the project here so you are working on this, on the second one, I suppose, or second or third one. So we're
now doing the next, we're building 10 trucks right now. So now we started our first production run.
All right. So what is the, let's start with the end in mind. Like, so when do you think you'll be able to ship the first one out, or all 10 at the same time? And what is the biggest bottleneck, and how are you dealing with that, with those dependencies, things that you have to wait for versus things you can work on while you wait, for example?
Well, so we're hoping to get the trucks kind of shipped out towards this summer, end of summer. That's kind of the goal. The biggest pain points have honestly just been parts. You're like, what? Sometimes like parts just show up 2 months late. Like we had the steer axles that should have been here 2 months ago. They showed up 2 months late, and they were missing parts for like the wheel ends to mount the wheel end hub kit. You're like, the fuck? And then also now it's another week to get those nuts in. You're like, it's just, okay, that's holding up the whole thing because I can't put the chassis on until I get the steer axle on. And so like I can't get a rolling chassis, and then the cab can't go on. And like it all just kind of, you got to figure out like, well, what do the mechanics do? What can they work on? Well, then maybe they can work on this in the meantime. And
do you have like some sort of spreadsheet, some sort of like, okay, we do this first and then that and then the other, and then if something gets delayed, can you tell, okay, now we're going to be this many weeks late? Or how are you keeping track of all this? Or is it all in your head?
We're just letting the mechanics do their thing and the parts guys do their thing. The people ask, do you want a Gantt chart? I'm like, no, I don't need a fucking Gantt chart. That's stupid. They're like, what do you mean? They're like, oh, why am I going to waste time? Like, what, I'm going to waste my time spending time making a Gantt chart.
Right.
So that what? I don't know when the parts are showing up. The parts show up when the parts show up. Me putting it into a Gantt chart doesn't make the supplier get the shit axle to me faster. They're like, we know what all the parts are. We know where they need to go. We have mechanics that really know what they're doing. They're experts. We got engineers that have sourced the parts, and they're like, okay, well, we need to have these parts kind of arriving by these dates to have a rough time. But like, we probably spent all of 15 minutes, 20 minutes on project planning for this thing. And it's not going to make a difference. The fanciest Gantt chart in the world doesn't make the axle show up.
Right.
All we do is we have really good mechanics who have experience building trucks. And when the parts show up, they put them on. And when the parts don't show up, they work on other things. So like, well, maybe we'll install the high voltage lines now. Like, okay, I can do it up to this point and I can do this. So they're just working away on the trucks and putting it in, and it seems to be working pretty good.
Yeah. Well, you have a Gantt chart in your head. That you just told me. You just described that to me, so because the project so well, and the mechanics do as well. Right? So they know that, they instinctively know, like, okay, if this is not here today, then we can work on these other things, right? So you can.
I guess that's just it. We have a lot of really competent people that have a mental Gantt chart in their own head, and everyone's kind of in sync with everyone else. And
all right. And so how many people are working on these 10 trucks right now?
We got about 15 full-time employees total. Between engineers, we got 3 mechanics that are actually putting the pieces on, and then we had a lot more. We have now we got 3 mechanical engineers, 3 electrical engineers, and then we have like the accountant that handles like all the accounting things that a business needs.
Right.
And then we got a guy that handles making all the videos for YouTube and that. 2 guys that actually work on that.
Right. Because I'm sure that's a big part of the marketing and the fundraising, I suppose.
Oh, that's how we fund our business, is YouTube. The videos, the revenue from YouTube, and the merch sales. So
okay,
that's what pays for the engineers and a lot of the other guys to continue on in their work.
Can people invest like, okay, I'd like a part of the business, and so invest some money and own some stock or at least, I guess you're not ready for that part yet. But how, if people want to invest, is there a way to do that?
Yeah, so we are selling shares, but it's a private listed company. So we're pre-IPO.
Right.
So they can go to the website and invest in there, but there are limitations because we're pre-IPO. It's like people that make over $200,000 a year gross income or have over $1 million in financial asset. Like there's rules the government put in place. But yeah, we are raising money. Like we just so we're at the point where we raised enough to cover our operating expenses for the next 2 years.
Okay.
We raised enough to cover building the next trucks that we're keeping for ourselves. We raised enough to be able to we bought a 300-acre piece of industrial land and basically a warehouse and facility where we can actually start going to scale. So we're moving out of the old backyard tent, as you would call it, and now I got to figure out how to. So I got to figure out how to build a shop, get a shop going, and all that part. So that's a whole other project I got to take on. So how would you do it for project management? Like you're the project management expert here. Like, okay, so we've got these trucks for customers. We've got a shop that we've got to build so that we can scale up. Like how would you manage all that in my position?
Well, I always like to start with the end in mind. Like, so, okay, I want to be able to deliver. So the whole thing of like the book, I read a book on this, right? Like, and the tagline is like how to deliver on your projects, deliver on your promises is part of it, right? So when, so let's say if you're telling a customer that, hey, you're gonna have your truck, you need to tell them when, the what, and the how much, right? So how much it's gonna cost, when you'll be able to deliver it, and the scope, what it is that you're delivering to them. And then with those three, then you have to work backwards, right? So if you want to do that.
See, we told them like how much and what, but when they asked the when, we just said it'll be built when it's built.
Yeah.
Like we just told them, they're like, look, these are first like prototype production runs.
Yeah.
We don't know the things we don't know. It's why we didn't really do a Gantt chart, because like, oh, when do we expect these to arrive? When do we expect the cab to arrive? We're like, well, the cab isn't even finished engineering yet.
Right.
And I don't know how long it's going to take to build it after that. So we just straight up went to our customers and said, look, you're a development partnership. We're going to work on this together. You're going to tell us what you want for your cab. Like, how do you want your truck to look and feel? Like, as a customer, you're going to give active say. And they got really involved with our engineers, how they wanted it, how they wanted everything laid out, how they wanted the controls to work. But we just said, like, because we're still working with you to develop it, we don't know when it's going to be done. So we knocked that part off of the stress anyways.
Right. And I think at this stage it's fine because people are, they are aware, right? That you're a startup and you're figuring it out and you're still figuring out the parts and where they're coming from and things like that. In a way, there are other companies that are boutique. They do stuff like, I'm sure you're familiar with, there's some shops out of California and they do retrofits for cars. What are they called? Like Icon. Sure, if you're Icon 4x4, for example, they take those old Toyota Land Cruisers from the 60s and 70s and they just like retrofit with the new engine, like a new V8, stuff like that, right? And each project is unique and it takes as long as it's going to take because it's more like a boutique shop. But then next stage for you, I suppose, if you want to grow, right? Eventually you're going to have to be able to tell, hey, you can have your truck by whatever. And I think that's, a company that does project management really well. And we don't really know exactly how they do it because it's so secretive. It's Apple, right? They'll tell you, hey, this is the new iPhone. It's going to cost this much. Here are the features. And you're going to be able to buy it on October 9th at 9 a.m., right? And that takes incredible knowledge of your entire process, but to be able to make that promise that, hey, you'll be able to buy it then, and something that Tesla can't still figure out how to do, right? They'll give you the date, but then they never deliver because it's they still haven't figured it out. But yeah, eventually I think right now it's fine, but I think eventually is that something you'd like to get to, right? To get to that point that people can go order online and hey, yeah, 6 weeks it's here or whatever.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we're working at, is figuring that out for production. So what I've got the guys doing as mechanics are just writing down their time. How long does it take to install these parts? Okay, how long did it take to install these parts? How much time did it take on the very first truck when you were figuring it out? How much time did it take on that fourth truck when you did it on four? Because we're doing all of them at the same time, and they do 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're like, okay, so the time took between this amount and this amount is about how long it takes to install the part.
Right.
So we're going backwards, and we're just saying, okay, the mechanics. So assuming that the parts are there, it takes the mechanics this long to install each part. And then now we're looking and we're like, okay, the steer axle, they said it was going to be 2 weeks. It was actually 2.5 months before we got it. So let's put that into the chart of like, what's the longest part, and when do the parts need to be ordered before they show up, and then how long does it take to install it, and then just add an extra month in between parts showing up and parts installing, so that you know that you can account for some of that different, keep an extra inventory. And we're just kind of figuring it out backwards for production from how long it takes now.
Yeah, and in fairness, this is non-trivial. You know, like this is something that I'm sure you've heard. You know, the Toyota way. You know, it's something that Toyota invented in the 70s and 80s. You know, which is like the just-in-time manufacturing, right? So figuring out how much of these parts you need to order ahead of time, so they get there just as they need to be picked up to be put into the vehicle, right? As opposed to like buying a bunch of them and storing them and paying for storage.
And we thought a lot about that, and I don't want to do just-in-time manufacturing.
Yeah.
We're not at a scale where we're going to worry about having our extra inventory. And it goes back to what we say about those vocational trucks. Customers need parts when they need them. Right. We got to be able to keep an inventory in stock that like we can get that part onto a truck like right now and start driving it towards our customer. He needs a new steer axle. He just ran over a big rock in the road, took the steer axle off. Like they need to put that truck back. Like throw that out in the parts truck, or have the customer show up and be able to give them that part or that air dryer or whatever they need. Like you got to be able to keep an inventory for your service side along with your production side. Whereas companies like Toyota don't need to worry about that because they have dealers at the dealer level where the dealership is going to keep a parts inventory, or there'll be central warehouses that send parts out to the dealer. Like as a startup, we don't have that luxury of having dealerships that are going to be carrying inventory. So we need to carry that inventory to also support our trucks. So like we're not doing just in time. So hopefully it just comes down to how fast can the mechanics rattle bolts together.
Yeah, no, and I mentioned Toyota because just as an example, like this is not something that a lot of companies do well. You know, it's like this very complex art, you know, and it depends on your market, depends on the size of how much you're making, how many of these units you're producing, you know, what the market is for parts and things like that. And it's not an easy thing, you know, like it's very few companies that do this well, and they made tough decisions, you know, to make that a priority. And like you said, it's not part of your decision making right now. And people who are giving you money to buy these trucks, they totally understand, and they're kind of excited, I'm sure, to be part of it and get the updates from you on YouTube of how far along the trucks are, and it's super exciting. And you know, and eventually at some point, you might want to look into that. But you know, you talk about project management, you're thinking about all the right things. You know, like the lead time for these things and what you can do in between. You know, there's a whole there's a process, you know, the critical path method, you know, in project management, in which you look kind of, okay, here it comes from the Gantt chart, you know, back to the Gantt chart, but basically you look at all the things and how they depend on each other and say, okay, if I want to shorten this lead time, delivery time for this truck, for example, where should I put my money? You know, what parts should I buy more of? And there's a technique to figure that out. But
you know, I've got an interesting example here at our company for project management for our EV go-kart challenge. I don't know. We did this high school challenge where we bought a bunch of like electric go-kart kits for high schools in the province. Yeah. And we told them like design and build your own vehicle, and you're going to show up to compete in a series of challenges and races, and like the best school wins. Well, so we I was super busy, and we had a guy, real nice guy. Have nothing bad to say about the guy. He's fantastic, but he worked for a larger company, I think, and did a lot more in detailed project management. He's like, hey, I want to work on something. Like, I'm retired. Let me work on something. And I'm like, well, okay. Like, do you want to handle this high school go-kart challenge? Well, he went away that weekend and came back with a 6-page detailed project management plan, let's call it. And all of a sudden, this entire go-kart challenge, he broke it down to like how many staff we needed, who needed to be there, how things were going to happen, how people were going to arrive, how the events were going to be organized, what team would show up to what event at what time. Like, it was all broken down into like this super detailed thing. And the event ended up taking, like, under his plan, 2.5 days, showing up on Friday and then having each team go to each event. And the total cost was estimated at being about $200,000 from this detailed project plan. And he would have different schools at different times. Like, it was very, very detailed, down to like at 15-minute intervals and the day before, and how communications would be handled leading up to the event with the schools. And you're like, I remember looking at this guy and like, man, we can't do that. Like, we can't do a $200,000 high school challenge that's going to last a full weekend. Right. And you're like, to give you an idea, what we changed it over to was we completely ripped up that plan, sat down, and we just said, hey, what if we just tell the high schools to show up in Merritt at 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, and the races start at 11. And we just have it as a free-for-all. And instead of organizing races by time, we just host all 4 events simultaneously, and the kids can decide what school they want to go to or what race they want to go to when they want to go to it. We brought that $200,000 cost down with marshals and all. And then we're like, we'll ask a local volunteer, and maybe they'll show up, maybe they won't, but we'll figure it out. But we took that $200,000 cost over a 3-day event down to $500 that we spent on the total event, and it happened over 5 hours, and everyone was happy. But like, we just threw out the plan completely, went in with 0 plan, and be like, just show up at this date, like build a go-kart and show up at this date, and then you will compete in a series of races in a free-for-all for 4 hours. Like, I don't know, if you don't get to all the events, then you're going to lose points in your score. So we figured it out.
Yeah,
and well, it works. Like,
it works, and in a way, So in a way, you outsourced a little bit of the planning to the teams, right? Like, you can show up, be ready, and then how they do it, it's up to them, right?
Exactly, and that's the same process we had with engineering and designing our trucks, which was a project in itself. It's like, man, we have to figure out all of this stuff that we have to design and build. And we got to build this prototype. We've never built an electric vehicle before. How are we going to do it? And we said, fuck it. We don't know enough to know the things we don't know.
Right.
Let's just get started and see what happens. Like, let's just start. And some of the parts were wasted. I remember buying an electric motor and being like, oh, this one won't work. And let's try that. And we're like, okay, we'll try this one. And like, okay, I think we wasted about $50,000. But we got it done. We got the entire project done where we had a highway legal, like street legal truck, between building the prototype with the old retrofit, building a brand new truck that was designed from frame rails up. Like, we ordered bare frame rails, ordered suspension, put the cab on, like designed our own cab, built our own cab for $2 million. These other companies are spending $2 billion to design and build a vehicle. Like, we did it for 1,000 times less. And we just kind of did it the same as the high school challenge. We said, we don't know the things we don't know. Let's just figure it out as we go. And it'll get done when it gets done. Like, it'll work.
Yeah, totally. Like, it's my dad says this something. Like, how does it go? According to the laws of aerodynamics, bumblebees should not be able to fly, but bumblebees do not know the laws of aerodynamics, so they fly anyway.
I think that was it. We just didn't know the laws of project management, and we just it should not have worked. Yeah. Edison Motors should not have worked. We should not have been able to. You should not be able to design, manufacture, and build a billion-dollar thing that costs billions of dollars at most companies for like just $1 or $2 million. and actually be able to pull that off. Like,
but you know what, Chase, you're building this for the directly to the end user, right? So you have the connection, because the person who is going to be buying, at least the person they're going to be buying for, it's a bunch of Chase Barbers, right? Like, they're going to be driving this thing. They understand it, right? So there's this excitement, and there's no middleman there. A lot of these plans that are put together, right, that are more grandiose, they're not to excite the end user. They're to excite the investor, right, or the bank. They want to see, they want to lower their risk. They're not in it for the passion. They're in it for the return. So.
Investors hated this idea, by the way. Like, do not take this strategy if you want to attract investors. Because if you go in there and be like, well, what's your plan to build the first one? You're like, we have no plan. We are going to wing this and hope for the best. And when we run into problems, we'll find, and that's what we did. Like, we ran into problems, but we didn't know what the problems were going to be. But we had enough confidence in ourselves and our team that when we did run into a problem, we'd be able to find somebody that knew how to fix the problem. And we did. Like, oh, hey, we need somebody that's an expert in thermal management for batteries. How do we control the heat of the batteries? Oh, shit, I didn't think about that. Well, I'll just reach out to somebody that knows it, and somebody would come in and say, hey, here's a thermal management diagram. I whipped that up for you yesterday. Oh, thanks. Here's how we know. Now we can take that to the supplier, and they'll build the thermal management system based on this guy's diagram.
Yeah.
But we just solved that. That whole problem took all of 6 hours to solve.
Yeah. So planning all this ahead in advance, and then avoiding some of these delays, the cost of it is your experience, right? Because what you're doing with this is, like, it may take a bit longer, and but you're learning so much, right? And you are you're like the face of this company and of the product. So it's worth that extra time if you're gonna be so much more in tune with the product, right? Like, now I'm sure you know all about battery management and heat dissipation and things like that, because you had to, hey, it's a problem that you found and you had to solve it, right? And I'm sure if at some point, you realize that, hey, I need more planning here, I need to do better, this is going to be a problem that you're going to face, and you're going to figure out how to do it. So, but until you face it, why bother, right? Like, I call it just-in-time learning, right? It's like,
that's exactly it. Just-in-time learning. That is how we based our business, and we have just-in-time learning and just-in-time project management. We manage the little projects. So I guess we do have project management, but we manage the little projects, and we broke them down into little projects, and we're like, oh, thermal management, okay, that's going to be its own little project, and we'll have a quick little mental way on how we're going to handle that project, and we'll put that figure into the general, more loose plan.
Right.
We're not going to stress when things go wrong or things fall off. Like,
yeah,
Eric, my business partner, he tried to make Gantt charts at the start. He's a little bit more nerdy.
Yeah,
but it never, like, what we thought was going to happen. Like, we just learned, they're like, man, throw those Gantt charts out. Like, this is, some things are way faster, some things are way longer. Like, this Gantt chart is meaningless. Like, I hate to say it, but you're wasting hours making this detailed Gantt chart at the start. Like, let's just break it down into individual just-in-time learning and just-in-time project management.
Yeah, and in the end, I don't know if I'm a married man, right? I'm married to a woman, and by definition, because I'm a man, she's a woman, we're incompatible, right? So, but we complement each other. And I think in the end, it's all about complementarity. At some point, you're going to need more planning. You're going to need more structure. But the company also needs the idea person and the risk taker, right? And the project manager character, they tend to be more or the operations person, they tend to be more of a tactical, right? Like okay, we're gonna plan this, and it's more like about the math of it. And that's
probably honestly what's gonna happen with Edison is, like, as we're growing, we're starting to be. I'm more of like the innovator, the risk taker, the idea. And Eric is more methodical. He's more planned out. He likes having that structure. He likes being project management. Well, as we start going more and more in production, Eric takes more of an interest in that, because it becomes way more important. When you're shooting from the hip and you're just rapid fire prototyping, my ideas tend to work a lot better. As we progress into more manufacturing, Eric's roles and ideas and project management skills take on a lot more useful things. So it's kind of cool is that you have this internal battle at Edison Motors between I'm a truck driver, I'm a logger. Like loggers, risk takers are just through the roof. The risk taking of a logger on the ground is just insanely high. Eric has a degree in accountant, so he's this accounting guy, numbers guy, and it's like it's this really cool combination of let's cut down trees on the side of the mountain, followed by okay, but let's make sure we do a risk analysis of that tree falling. And
cool.
It's a perfect combination between the two business partners that leads to this unique success.
Yeah. And I think you can relate to this. Like, there was a time in my life when I had to go. I was out in these remote locations for. It involved solar power as well. We can get into that some other time. But you'd be like in Labrador somewhere, right? And a little trailer with a solar panel on top, and they're trying to figure out like why is it not connecting to the satellite or whatever. And you're by yourself, and there's no Home Depot nearby if you need a part. So you need to think about these things. You need to kind of make stuff up as you go. You need to think on your feet, right, and solve the problems. And I think the logger is that's their entire life, because they're up in a mountain, something breaks, you can't just call for CAA. You have to figure it out, and I think you have that that spirit, right, that you bring to the business. Like, okay, we'll figure it out. This is nothing.
We'll figure it out. We're out here, we're on our own, and I think that large companies or government organizations have gone too far. Like from being in it, seeing into these places, talking with engineers from these large corporations, they've gone too far in the way of we need to have everything planned out. Like they want to plan to the nth degree, or they want to have this huge formulated plan, and there's no, well, something will probably go wrong, but we'll figure it out at the time when it goes wrong. Like that's just, nowadays, that's not an acceptable answer, but we need some of that. Like you need to have guys that you can trust, or women that you can trust out in the field or at the management level that says, hey, something will go wrong, but we'll figure it out at the time. And like, we don't really know what's going to happen here, but we'll figure it out when we get there. Like that is an actually useful skill where you need to have a look of like, am I planning something that can be figured out later? Or like, do I even need to plan for this? Continue. Like, we've just gone too far. We've planned out, these big corporations plan out every little detail, every little thing. And it's like, they're getting so bogged down, becoming so inefficient. They're hiring consultants to review consultant work. And like, fuck. Like, guys,
I know.
Just try it.
That's right. Yeah. And that's what, like, think of talking about Apple again. You had the idea guy was Steve Jobs, and you had the ops guy, which was Tim Cook, right? And so Steve Jobs is the one who went from nothing to the iPod idea, and then from the iPod to the iPhone and the iPad, right? And then I think it was around iPhone 5, he died, and then Tim Cook took over. And since then, all we're getting is better and better iPhone 5s. We're not getting anything new, They're super efficient and stuff, but it's just, we're missing that spark, right, of the creator.
And you need both. It's like,
you need both,
it's a perfect example between Eric is very much the Tim Cook. I'm very much a Steve Jobs guy. This business would not exist if it was all, like, if it's all Steve Jobs and like crazy ideas, and we're just going to try some really innovative shit and like try and see what happens. Like that doesn't work without the Tim Cook, who can like bring that responsible management, but you need to balance both.
That's right. I agree.
Like they need another Steve Jobs to come back in there and like innovate some change. Like, yes, you're a very professional business and you're handling things really well, but you're not doing anything that wows people anymore. And I'm sorry, but the iPhone came out 20 years ago now. Like, let's have something cool again.
Right. That's awesome. Chase, okay, so let's say people are excited. They're listening right now. They want to learn more about you, what you're doing. Where should they go?
YouTube. I always recommend YouTube. So we put everything we do on YouTube. For better or worse, the good and the bad, what goes right, what goes wrong. We show the entire journey on YouTube.
Sounds good. And if people want to invest, where should they go?
The only spot you can do that is on our website. edisonmotors.ca.
Okay. So I'm going to have links to both the YouTube channel and also the website on the show notes for today's episode. We're like over an hour here. This is great conversation. I appreciate your time.
It's fantastic.
But Chase, thank you so much for your time. As a fellow Canadian here, I'm rooting for you. I hope that all this talk about tariffs, they die quickly. And if they don't, that you find a solution quickly for them. But I hope that you continue to grow. And I'm going to go look and see if I can give you some money because I want to be part of it. And then
that'd be awesome. We could sure use it to help build that shop.
Sounds good. Again, Chase, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to meet you. And I really appreciate you making the time.
Awesome. Thank you. This is fun.
Thank you for listening to the PM for the Masses podcast.
Tune in next week for more great ideas on how to manage your projects better and truly stand out in your industry.
PMforthemasses.com